John Anderson was a man of routine. Since his college days, life had been predictable, especially after meeting Ami, a fellow student with a passion for art. They quickly bonded over shared goals. Although their paths diverged, John started a small printing business while Ami pursued her art. Despite their different interests, their marriage seemed strong, and they supported each other as they built a life together. Their happiness peaked with the birth of their daughter, Amanda, who became the center of their world. However, as time passed, subtle changes began to creep into their conversations. John didn't notice at first, as he was too busy to address them. It wasn't until Amos' distant behavior became impossible to ignore in recent months that he began to worry. Sitting at his desk, John wondered what to do. His wife of 6 years had been acting differently since Christmas, seeming preoccupied and distant. Their once meaningful conversations had dwindled to brief exchanges, and Amos' repeated reassurances that everything was fine only frustrated him more. He was determined to confront her that evening. Ami had been attending evening art classes for the past 5 months, and John noticed that these classes often went late. On other nights, she would spend hours working on her paintings while John took care of Amanda. During these times, he began to wonder if something else was going on. He checked in on her twice at the university but found nothing suspicious. She was always where she said she'd be, working on her art. As he sat there, unsure of how to fix something he couldn't even confirm was broken, his new assistant, Mary, approached him with a message that Ami was on the phone. Mary, a recent hire, had quickly proven her worth, handling customer service and administrative tasks efficiently, which freed John to focus on running the business. With the post-Christmas slowdown ending, he appreciated her skills even more. John picked up the phone. "Hello, dear. Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," Ami replied. "I just wanted to know if you'll be home at the usual time tonight." "I should be," he assured her. "Mary has things under control here." "Good," Ami said. "I need to talk to you. See you at 5:15. Goodbye." "Love you," she replied, but she had already hung up. John stared at the phone, troubled by how quickly she ended the call. Just a few months ago, they would have chatted playfully, but now she seemed distant. John looked at a photo on his desk from their vacation last year in Florida. They were on the beach, smiling with their arms around each other. He remembered how good their first 5 years of marriage had been, filled with trips and romance. Their love, once vibrant, had faded, and he couldn't understand why. He hoped for answers that evening. The phone ringing snapped John out of his thoughts. He answered it, then returned to work, deciding to deal with his issues with Ami later. Just before closing time, Mary and Frank, his only other employee, came into his office. Mary informed him of an urgent job that had to be done by the following morning, but John couldn't stay late. Frank reluctantly agreed to work extra hours. John quickly packed up, eager to talk with Ami. He left the office and arrived home early, entering the kitchen to find Ami gazing out the window. When he greeted her and tried to kiss her, she turned away, saying, "Please, John, don't do this." Confused, John followed her into the living room. She sat down and, after a moment, said, "John, I'm leaving you. I'm not divorcing you right now, but I'm going to be with someone else." Stunned, John asked, "How can you say that?" Ami explained that during her art course, she had realized she'd fallen for Peter, her instructor. She felt they were a better fit and had more in common. Peter would be moving to Paris at the end of the term, and she wanted to go with him as his wife. "Your instructor?" John asked, incredulous. Ami nodded, unable to look him in the eyes. "Yes, John. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen, but it has to be this way." John sat in silence, memories of the years he had spent with Ami flooding back, of the love they had shared and the future he had imagined. He wanted to plead with her, to reason with her, but deep down, he knew nothing would change her mind. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. Ami stood up slowly. My lawyer will send over the paperwork on Monday. I'm leaving now. Amanda is with my parents, and they'll bring her home at 7. John wiped his eyes and followed her to the hallway, watching as she picked up her suitcases and walked out the door. At the bottom of the steps, Peter Bridge approached and took one of her suitcases, casting a smug look at John. Ami didn't look back as they drove away. John closed the door, tears streaming down his face as he sat back down on the sofa, replaying the events of the night in his mind. Time passed until the doorbell rang. For a brief moment, John hoped it was Ami coming back, but it was his father, Fred Holmes, who entered. I see she told you, Fred said with a disappointed look. John looked at Fred and replied, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Fred's wife, June, and their daughter, Barbara, followed, bringing Amanda and her things. The family's somber expressions showed they had been crying, though Amanda remained cheerful, unaware of the pain around her. John stood up, and they all hugged him, offering comfort. Without siblings and with his parents absent, his home felt empty. They sat together, discussing what had happened, and no one could believe it. Tears flowed again as they shared their disbelief. Around 7:30, June suggested finding something to eat, and she and Fred went to the kitchen to prepare sandwiches. Barbara handed Amanda to John, who let his daughter play in his lap, even as she tugged on his hair. Despite the sadness, Amanda's laughter brought a moment of relief. Soon, everyone gathered around the coffee table to eat. John didn't feel hungry but ate anyway, appreciating their company. As they ate, he observed the Holmes family, Fred and June, both retired and active, and Barbara, a quiet 16-year-old with braces. After the meal, Amanda entertained everyone by standing on the coffee table and reaching for plates, lifting everyone's spirits with her antics. By 8:30 p.m., Barbara volunteered to get Amanda ready for bed while Fred and June discussed the logistics of managing work and childcare. They decided that John would need childcare help, and June offered to assist. Meanwhile, John planned to take the following day off to sort things out. Barbara returned to let him know that Amanda was asleep, and John thanked her for her help. After more conversation, the Holmes family decided to leave. John expressed his gratitude and closed the door behind them. He checked on Amanda, who was sleeping soundly, then poured himself a strong drink to steady his nerves. As he sipped his whiskey, anger began to replace his earlier sadness. Ami had shattered his world, and he swore not to let everything slip away. John went upstairs to the master bedroom and turned on the light. It was his first time there since Ami had left, and he noticed the empty closet and bare dresser. The attached bathroom was also devoid of her belongings. He turned off the light and collapsed onto the bed, feeling the emptiness inside. Ami was gone, and although he doubted he could win her back, he felt he had to try, eventually. Finally, the whiskey took effect, and he fell into a restless sleep, still dressed. He woke up early, took a hot shower, and went through his morning routine. Though the thought of living without Ami weighed heavily on him, he checked on Amanda, who was still asleep with her teddy bear. He kissed her cheek and went downstairs to prepare breakfast, making coffee and finding cereal for himself and Amanda, forcing himself to eat despite having no appetite. When Amanda noticed that it was her father feeding her instead of Ami, she started crying, and John struggled to calm her down. He eventually distracted her with a toy, and she settled. He called the office and left a message for Mary to contact him. When they returned his call, he explained that he would work from home for most of the day but planned to stop by the office later. He didn't mention what had happened. Shortly after, June arrived to take care of Amanda while John finished his work. At 10, June noticed John's exhaustion and commented on it. John admitted he hadn't slept well and only managed with the help of whiskey, but he was determined to cope for Amanda's sake. He even confided that he might consider getting back with Ami for Amanda's well-being, though he suspected Ami had already moved on. June hesitated before revealing that Ami had told her she had been involved with Peter over the past few weeks, something Amanda didn't know. John thanked her for the clarification but doubted that Ami would change her mind. So he decided to focus on work as a distraction. John went to the office, determined not to let his business falter, and kissed Amanda, reminding himself that his priority was to help Amanda get through this situation unscathed. At the office, Mary was busy on the phone, so John went straight to his desk, taking a moment to compose himself after the emotional wave had subsided. He decided it was time to explain the situation to her. When Mary entered his office, John asked her to close the door and sit down. It was difficult for him, but he finally said, "Mary, I have a serious situation at home. My wife left me last night but didn't take our daughter. I'm a single father now. You've only been here 2 weeks, but you've shown great competence. I'd like to appoint you as the office manager, with a raise." Mary was surprised but accepted the offer, assuring John that she was up to the task, especially with the extra pay. John expressed his confidence in her abilities, explaining that he needed her support as he balanced work and caring for Amanda. He later shared the news with Frank, who offered his support. John worked until mid-afternoon before heading home with some files. He asked Mary to call him if any issues arose, assuring her he trusted her decisions. At home, June told John that Amanda had been upset about her mother at lunch but eventually calmed down. John organized his study to work, realizing he needed better equipment for working from home. The afternoon passed quickly, and by 4:30, he had finished his work. June, who had started dinner, mentioned she had a commitment over the weekend and suggested that Barbara help with Amanda. John agreed and thanked Barbara for her help. After June left, John fed Amanda, who cried for her mother again, but he managed to distract her. The night was quiet. After Amanda's bath and bedtime, John poured himself a whiskey and thought about Ami. It was midnight before he went to bed. On Monday, February 4th, John woke up early and reflected on the weekend. Barbara had been a good friend to John, and he had been a good friend to Ami for a long time. Barbara arrived on Saturday and took care of Amanda, allowing John to focus on turning his living room into a functional office. By midday on Sunday, his office was set up, and he spent the rest of the day with Amanda and Barbara at the park. Although Amanda had a few tantrums, Barbara managed to calm her and keep her occupied. June picked up Barbara on Sunday afternoon, promising to return on Monday morning. She arrived at 8:30 a.m., and John went to the office. The morning was busy until Mary brought in a courier envelope from a law firm. She handed it to John with a concerned look on her face. John hesitated before opening it to find papers reflecting the terms Ami had agreed to, including arrangements for her time with Amanda. John placed the papers in his briefcase, knowing he needed to contact his lawyer, but he felt drained. He already dreaded seeing Ami again, fearing it would feel like losing her all over again. The rest of Monday and Tuesday flew by, but on Wednesday morning, he woke up earlier than usual, eager to leave as soon as Ami arrived. When the doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m., he prepared himself. Ami was out on the street when he opened the door, so he simply said, "Come in. Amanda is still asleep. I'm leaving now." He grabbed his briefcase from the kitchen and left through the side door, relieved to avoid a conversation with her, fearing he might break down. Wednesday felt like the longest day of John's life, his thoughts consumed by Ami's presence at home. When he returned, his emotional pain resurfaced, and twice he almost broke down in tears, wondering if he should consider counseling for depression. At 4:30, he called home and told Ami, "I'll be home around 5. When John arrived home, he heard Ami leaving through the front door, but when he came in through the side door, he saw her driving away without looking back. Dinner didn't go well, he couldn't eat, and Amanda, after finishing her food, started crying for her mother. Nothing seemed to comfort her, and she cried so hard it was difficult for her to breathe. Deeply affected, John finally calmed her, gave her a bath, and stayed with her until she fell asleep. That night, John repeated his ritual of having a whiskey and deep thoughts, staying awake until 1:30. John decided he needed to take action, for himself and his daughter, and planned to contact his lawyer. On Thursday morning, John called his lawyer and scheduled an appointment for 2 p.m. He gave his lawyer, Bob Taylor, the papers from Ami's attorney. After reviewing them, Bob noted that the terms were unusually favorable, with no demands for personal or child support. John agreed but insisted on changes. He wanted Ami to relinquish all parental rights, avoid any contact with Amanda or him, and sign a legally binding agreement to stay at least 500 feet away from the house. Bob was skeptical but agreed to draft the letter, cautioning John that Ami might not accept these terms. John returned to work feeling better now that his demands were underway, and he decided to repeat the weekend arrangement with Barbara, as it had gone well. Barbara agreed, and they had another pleasant weekend together. This time, she brought her homework, and John helped her with geometry and algebra while Amanda napped, which he considered a fair trade for her help. On Tuesday, February 12th, John's week began with the new routine he had established, working from home and staying connected to the office via his new computer setup. Mary was managing the office well and rarely needed his intervention. Business had picked up, and all 3 employees were busy. Just before lunch, he received a call from his lawyer, Bob Taylor, asking him to come in for a meeting at 2 p.m. When John arrived, Bob smiled and said, "I don't know how you did it, but Ami has agreed to all your terms. I've never seen a divorce resolved so quickly and with such serious terms. Her lawyer will send over the documents for signing later today. Once you've signed, we'll send you your copies." Working from home went smoothly on Tuesday, but the following days were challenging as he tried to balance both work and Amanda's care on his own. The demands of parenthood often interrupted his work. On Friday night, after putting Amanda to bed, he poured himself a whiskey and realized he needed a better plan. After breakfast on Saturday, he called June and arranged a visit for 2 p.m. She also invited them to stay for dinner, which John gladly accepted. When they arrived, Barbara immediately took over caring for Amanda, which fit perfectly with John's plan. He joined Fred and June in the living room and explained recent events, including Ami's relinquishing of parental rights. Both were surprised but understood John's reasoning. John then proposed his idea, that Barbara move in and help care for Amanda after school, freeing him to work at the office in the afternoons. He explained that his growing business needed his attention and that Barbara could be compensated for her help. This arrangement would also allow Fred and June the freedom to travel. He emphasized that they should discuss it with Barbara and decide soon. June agreed it was a promising idea and suggested they discuss it with Barbara after dinner and give John an answer the next day. Everyone agreed, and the topic was not mentioned again during the visit. After a pleasant evening, John and Amanda returned home and spent a quiet Saturday night together. On Sunday morning, John received the expected call from June. She told him that Barbara was very excited about the idea and would be happy to help him. When Fred arrived, John showed him around the house's layout. The master bedroom and bathroom were to the right at the top of the stairs, with Ami's old studio on the left. Amanda's room and the main bathroom were next, and at the end of the hall was the guest room. Fred and John cleared out unnecessary items from the guest room to make space for Barbara's belongings. Fred offered to buy a rug, blinds, and curtains for Barbara's room, as John would be busy with work and Amanda. They also planned to install child safety gates on the stairs. On Monday, the 18th, John called Mary to let her know to contact him on his mobile phone in case of emergencies. He also instructed her to leave any overnight printing work for him, while Frank handled other tasks. The day went smoothly, with only 2 brief calls from Mary. At 3 p.m., Fred, June, and Barbara arrived with enough of Barbara's belongings for a 2-week stay. They helped set up her room, and John thanked them, kissed Amanda goodbye, and headed to the office. Once there, he held a meeting with Frank and Mary to explain his new schedule. John explained that he would be arriving around 3 p.m., aiming to reduce Frank's overtime hours. Frank and Mary had no issues with the plan and returned to their work. John worked on the files, took a break for a sandwich, and completed 2 small printing jobs before 9 p.m. He decided to leave early to check in on Barbara. At home, the atmosphere was quiet. He found Barbara working in her study, surrounded by school books, focused on her assignments in her pajamas. John asked how things were going, and Barbara mentioned that Amanda had been a little fussy but was generally fine. She also asked for help with her math homework, which John was happy to provide after freshening up. As they worked together, John noticed that Barbara seemed more comfortable around him, smiling more easily, though she still blushed whenever their hands accidentally touched. Their relationship had grown stronger. The rest of the week went smoothly. John and Barbara established routines. John prepared breakfast, Barbara packed lunches and fed Amanda, and John took care of Amanda when Barbara went to school. On 2 evenings, John finished work early and joined Barbara at home. Their first weekend under the new arrangement also went well. Barbara cared for Amanda while John worked on Saturday afternoon, and John spent Saturday night with Amanda while Barbara went out with friends. On Sunday, they agreed that everything had gone well and decided to make the arrangement permanent. Barbara's remaining clothes would be brought over during the week, and they would arrange temporary guardianship documents to handle any school or emergency situations. 2 bank accounts would be set up, one for Barbara's salary and another for her clothing and allowance, funded by her parents. The next 2 weeks passed quickly as John and Barbara refined their routines. An emergency arose when an important client needed to meet with John unexpectedly. He asked his neighbor, Vicky Pierce, a 60-year-old widow, to watch the kids. Vicky enjoyed it and offered to help anytime, easing John's concerns. John's business continued steadily, and working in the evenings allowed him to avoid hiring another employee. Mary had become so capable that she rarely needed to call him at home. The pressure John had been feeling began to lessen, and he started to enjoy life again. Since Ami's departure, John's emotional and physical needs had been set aside. As the first anniversary of her leaving approached, he found himself gradually accepting life without her, though he still thought of her every day and went to sleep with her image in his mind. He also began to cut back on his nightly whiskey, fearing it might become a problem. He knew he had too much to live for, especially Amanda. On Sunday, March 10th, June and Fred joined John, Barbara, and Amanda for dinner before their RV trip. After dinner, they relaxed in the living room, talking and watching Amanda play. John admitted he hadn't expected to hear from Ami, given the terms of their separation. During the conversation, John asked if Barbara had her driver's license, recalling seeing her drive. Fred confirmed that she did, but mentioned they'd be taking their car on the trip. John offered to insure Ami's car for Barbara's use for school and errands, which both Fred and Barbara appreciated. Barbara agreed, excitedly promising to drive carefully. As the evening wound down, Barbara put Amanda to bed and planned to study while June and Fred prepared for their early departure. They said their goodbyes, promised to call regularly, and left, excited for their new adventure. John and Barbara waved them off from the front door. By Wednesday, March 27th, the 2.5 weeks had flown by for John and Barbara as they continued refining their household responsibilities. Barbara was now using the car for most shopping, generally on Saturdays, while John looked after Amanda. That morning, Barbara slept in, as her morning classes had been cancelled for a teachers' meeting she needed to attend. She asked John to wake up Amanda, which was usually her task, but after he fed Amanda, she started crying. John looked around, hoping Amanda would eventually stop missing her mother, but she continued to fuss. Just then, Barbara came downstairs for breakfast in her pajamas, and Amanda immediately stopped crying when she saw her. "It seems she's missing you, not Ami," John remarked, half-jokingly. "You better not move back home anytime soon." "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere," Barbara replied with a smile as she picked up Amanda and headed back upstairs. Around 10 a.m. on Thursday, April 4th, John had just finished reading to Amanda, who was now scribbling in her high chair with a crayon, when the doorbell rang. He made sure Amanda was secure before answering. He found Lynn Cameron, an old friend of Ami's, at the door. "Hello, Lynn, it's been a while," John greeted her. "Hello, John. I thought I'd stop by for a coffee," Lynn replied. "You're working from home now?" John invited her in, and they sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Lynn, looking as elegant as ever in a white sweater that highlighted her figure, took a sip and got to the point. "So, Lynn, what's the real reason you're here?" John asked with a knowing smile. "I've been talking with Ami," Lynn admitted. "She knows she can't contact you directly, but she asked me to check in. She doesn't want to reopen old wounds, she just wants a few photos of Amanda." "That's fine," John agreed. "I understand why she'd want photos, even if it might upset her." Lynn took some photos of Amanda coloring and shared that she had told Ami she'd made a mistake in leaving. Lynn even mentioned that if her ex had been like John, she never would have divorced him, and thanked him for his support. John reflected on how hard things had been, explaining that the first few days were tough, but he had hired a nanny for Amanda. Lynn was curious about the nanny, but before John could elaborate, his phone rang, reminding him of a haircut appointment he had forgotten. He apologized, and Lynn quickly took a few more photos, asking John to hold Amanda for a moment before hurrying out. She mentioned she would tell Ami about the nanny and would return for more photos, to which John agreed. On Wednesday, May 1st, Barbara's parents returned from their trip, and John and Barbara invited them to dinner. They shared stories and photos from their travels, mentioning that they had met a couple with similar interests and were planning to join them on another trip starting May 15th. Fred and June were excited about the upcoming trip and were eager to know how things were at home. John assured them that everything was going well. His business was busy, but he still had time to spend with Barbara and Amanda. Barbara was doing well in school, and Amanda was adjusting, even taking her first steps and starting to say, "Dada," and "Baba." Her grandparents were thrilled. Fred and June encouraged Barbara to keep an open mind about her future after finishing school, but they supported her choices. John mentioned that his business might need a graphic designer in the future, and Barbara joked that she might work for him someday. John informed them that Ami had sent Lynn to take photos of Amanda, which they agreed was probably for the best. They also noted that they hadn't heard anything from Ami. The week had been routine until Wednesday when John received a call from his lawyer, Bob Taylor, informing him that the divorce papers had been finalized and would be official in 3 weeks. This news hit John hard. Instead of working, he spent the afternoon lying on his bed, thinking about Ami, and the pain in his chest returned. Later, Lynn called to schedule another visit to take photos, but John asked her to wait until the following week, as he wasn't ready to deal with anything related to Ami. After a short workday, he confided in Mary, who was concerned enough to call him at home later that night. He retreated to his office with a whiskey, trying to hide his emotions from Barbara. However, she found him crying and comforted him, reminding him that he still had her and Amanda. The following Monday brought more difficult news. Barbara returned home after stopping by her parents' place with a message from Ami. Reluctantly, she told John that Ami had called to say she was marrying Peter Bridges on Saturday and that they were moving to Paris on Sunday. John's reaction was immediate. He went pale, and tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "Oh, God." Barbara gave him the news and thanked him for being there for Amanda, knowing he wouldn't be good company that night. He decided to go to the office to process his emotions after leaving Barbara. She silently expressed her sympathy for John, wishing she could help him move on from Ami. Later, she called her parents to share the news. On Tuesday, June 11th, John waited for Barbara to return from her final orthodontist appointment, hoping that getting her braces off would help her feel more confident and social. When she arrived, he smiled and said, "Let's see that big smile you've been hiding." Barbara showed her smile, and John encouraged her to show it more often, telling her she looked beautiful. Touched by his compliment, Barbara hugged him and kissed his cheek, making John blush as he responded. On Monday, July 1st, work had kept John busy, so he hadn't joined Barbara and Amanda. He spent Saturday doing chores and cooking, encouraging Barbara to go out with her friends that night. John spent the evening playing with Amanda, reading to her, and putting her to bed. When Barbara returned at 11:30 p.m., they watched Saturday Night Live together, laughing and sharing jokes. On Sunday, they went to the local zoo with a friend of Barbara's, and John enjoyed watching the girls have fun while they pushed Amanda in her stroller. They had dinner at a family-friendly restaurant, with the girls helping to entertain Amanda. On Monday, they enjoyed a picnic in the park where Barbara brought another friend. While Amanda played, the two girls socialized with other friends. Later, they enjoyed ice cream and watched fireworks that night. After Amanda fell asleep, Barbara thanked John for a wonderful weekend, gave him a hug, and went to bed, leaving John with a smile. A week later, June and Fred returned from their trip and spent many weekends and evenings with John, Barbara, and Amanda, sharing stories and photos and enjoying family time together. June adjusted her work schedule to spend more evenings with Amanda, giving Barbara time with her friends once a month. Lynn Cameron visited occasionally to take photos of Amanda to send to Ami in Paris. During a visit in July, Lynn hinted at her interest in John and suggested they go out. John politely declined, saying he wasn't ready, though Lynn made her intentions clear. In early August, John overheard Fred and June discussing what to get Barbara for her birthday on the 17th and realized he also needed to buy her a gift. He began thinking about what to get her. On the morning of Barbara's birthday, Saturday, August 17th, John woke up early to prepare a special breakfast. When Barbara came downstairs, she was surprised to see a "Happy Birthday" banner, a festive tablecloth, and candles on the table. "Good morning, birthday girl," John greeted her, serving her favorite blueberry pancakes, as her mother had mentioned. Barbara was touched by the effort and thanked John. After breakfast, he gave her a card and a coupon for a day at Domenico's Beauty Spa. Barbara was thrilled and hugged John tightly, though he gently pulled back, feeling a bit uncomfortable. He kissed her forehead and wished her a happy birthday. Later at her parents' house, Barbara's mother jokingly pointed out that the spa package included a bikini wax, which embarrassed Barbara. The conversation soon shifted, and eventually, she laughed it off. On Tuesday, September 10th, Barbara started her last year of high school with her first class at 11 a.m. She relaxed at home until she heard the doorbell and John greeting someone. Curious, she looked downstairs and saw a well-dressed woman taking photos of Amanda. The woman playfully touched John's chest, and Barbara overheard her saying, "I'll bill you for this next month," followed by laughter. Barbara felt uncomfortable, went back to her room, and wondered who the woman was and why she was acting that way with John. Later, she asked John about the visitor, and he explained that it was Lynn Cameron, a friend of Ami's who took monthly photos of Amanda. Still concerned, Barbara went to school, lost in thought. On Wednesday, October 16th, it was a warm autumn day, and John was outside with Amanda, who was out of her diaper as part of her potty training. They were playing in the front yard when John heard the sound of a camera shutter and saw Lynn Cameron arriving. "Hello, Lynn. I didn't see you there. How are you?" he greeted her. "I'm good, but I'd be even better if you took me out for dinner this weekend," Lynn replied with a playful smile. John laughed and agreed, suggesting Saturday night. Lynn suggested dinner and dancing, which John accepted, joking that she'd have to pick the dance spot, as it had been a while for him. Lynn hinted they could always dance at her place if they didn't find a spot, then took a few more photos before leaving, reminding John to make reservations. At dinner with Barbara and Amanda, John asked Barbara if she was available to watch Amanda on Saturday as he had a date with Lynn. Barbara's smile faded, and she agreed reluctantly, looking upset. After John left for work, determined to compete with Lynn, Barbara decided to use her spa gift certificate and start exercising. John, meanwhile, was excited about the date and feeling ready to move on from Ami. He made dinner reservations and finished his work with renewed energy. When he returned home, he noticed Barbara's light was still on and went to check if she was okay. Seeing that she had been crying, he asked if she was all right. Barbara downplayed it, saying she was just having a bad day. John offered to talk if she ever needed it and mentioned that Mrs. Pierce could look after Amanda if Barbara had plans, but Barbara assured him she would be fine. Before he left, Barbara asked if she could start using the exercise equipment in the basement. John agreed and reminded her to be careful with Amanda. The next morning, John noticed that Barbara had already started using the equipment and saw her coming back from a workout in a t-shirt and shorts. Barbara simply responded, "No time like the present," before heading up to shower. On Saturday, October 19th, John felt the day dragging as he waited for his evening date with Lynn. He noticed Barbara seemed unusually serious and checked if she was okay with looking after Amanda. She assured him she didn't mind. By 5:30 p.m., John was ready. When he came downstairs, Barbara complimented him, saying he looked very handsome. She handed him a list of places and phone numbers for the evening and mentioned that he might come home late, telling her not to wait up. After he left, Barbara held Amanda, fighting back tears, and quietly told her, "I hope your dad doesn't fall for her." Amanda's babbling brought a small smile to Barbara's face. When John arrived at Lynn's place, she welcomed him in an impressive black dress. He admired her with a whistle before they headed to a restaurant for dinner. Sitting close together, they enjoyed drinks and conversation. Lynn expressed her surprise that John had invited her out given his history with Ami. John admitted he hadn't entirely moved on from Ami but was trying to move forward. They had an excellent meal and shared a dessert, playfully feeding each other whipped cream. After dinner, they danced, and as they swayed close to one another, John noticed how physically close they had become. His initial worry that Lynn might notice his hesitation faded as they continued dancing. However, when a familiar song, a favorite of his and Ami's, came on, his mood shifted. Lynn sensed it and teased him lightly, but John explained the song's significance. They took a break from dancing, but eventually returned to the floor for more songs throughout the evening. Past midnight, they decided to leave. Lynn kissed John passionately, and they continued kissing in the car on the way back to her apartment. She invited him in for a drink, and once inside, they resumed their kisses before Lynn reminded him of the drink. After serving the wine, they toasted to good friends and continued talking. Lynn mentioned she had told Ami about her plans to invite John out, though Ami hadn't responded. John suggested they avoid talking about Ami, as her memory still affected him. Lynn took the hint, and they set their glasses aside as she led John to her bedroom, lighting candles. She stood before him and unzipped her dress, letting it fall to the floor. "Well, what do you think?" she asked, turning around. John simply responded, "Incredible." They soon shared an intimate night together and took a shower, enjoying a satisfying end to their evening. Lynn wanted John to stay overnight, but he knew he had to return home since he hadn't told Barbara he might be late. At 2:30 a.m., Lynn kissed him goodbye at her door, joking, "We need to do this again sometime." John laughed and agreed, it wouldn't take much persuasion. When he arrived home, he decided not to use the garage for fear of waking Barbara, but he noticed her watching him from her bedroom window. As he came into the house, he gently knocked on Barbara's door to ask if everything was all right since she was still awake. She replied that everything was fine but that she was tired. Sensing something was wrong, he asked if he could come in, and when she agreed, he entered and saw that she had been crying. Concerned, he asked what was bothering her. Barbara hesitated before asking if he was in love with Lynn and if Lynn was planning to move in, as she didn't want to leave him and Amanda. John was taken aback, but he reassured her, saying he wasn't in love with Lynn and that they were just friends, with no plans of anyone moving in. He added that he wanted Barbara to stay, at least until Amanda was older. Barbara smiled and thanked him, admitting she had been worried about being sent home. He touched her head gently, reassuring her she had nothing to worry about, then said goodnight, reminding her they both needed to get some sleep before Amanda woke up. Barbara lay in bed thinking for a while before finally falling asleep with a smile on her face. On Wednesday, October 23rd, John was ready to leave for work when Barbara arrived home from school, smiling. She asked if he had any plans for November 16th, and when he replied he didn't, she told him she had made a dinner reservation for his birthday and had arranged for Mrs. Pierce to watch Amanda. On Saturday, November 16th, John began his day early, but not as early as Barbara, who had already been exercising. She reminded him to be ready by 6 p.m. As he went upstairs, he reflected on how well things were going. His business was thriving, he had hired another printer, bought more equipment, and Mary, his office manager, was doing a fantastic job. She had even suggested hiring a part-time graphic design student, which had worked out well. John had gone out with Lynn again the previous weekend and spent another night with her. He noticed Barbara seemed a bit distant for a couple of days afterward but had returned to her usual self by Tuesday. Meanwhile, Amanda was progressing quickly, using many new words and proudly advancing in her potty training. Her grandparents were impressed with her growth. John spent the day with Amanda, reading her favorite books until she took a nap. While she slept, he caught up on office work. Later, after taking Amanda for a walk, he noticed Barbara's car had returned. Mrs. Pierce arrived at 4:30 to take care of Amanda, and after ensuring she had everything she needed, John went upstairs to get ready for his dinner. At 5 p.m., John was downstairs when Barbara appeared. Mrs. Pierce exclaimed, "Oh my, Barbara, look at you." John turned around and immediately understood why. Barbara's ponytail was gone, replaced by a chic haircut with highlights. Her makeup was flawless, and she had clearly had a manicure. She wore a black dress with a knee-length skirt, thin straps, and a matching purse. "Barbara, you look incredible," John said. "You've gone from 17 to 21 since this morning." "Thank you," Barbara replied, grinning from ear to ear. Mrs. Pierce turned Barbara around so John could see her completely, adding, "Barbara, you've truly grown from a girl to a young woman." Blushing but smiling, Barbara took John's arm and asked, "Well, Mrs. Pierce, are we off to celebrate?" John took his camera, and Mrs. Pierce snapped a few photos of them. Then it was time to go. John helped Barbara into the car, and as they drove off, he asked, "Where are we going?" "I reserved a table at the Sharon restaurant," she replied. "I thought it'd be nice, since you took Lynn there." "Seems like you know Mrs. Pierce pretty well," John commented. "She visits sometimes when you're at work." "We talk a lot, she's very kind," Barbara explained. At the Sharon, they were seated promptly, and John couldn't help noticing how much Barbara had matured, not just in appearance but in confidence. Barbara smiled and ordered a Coke, and John laughed at the contrast. Their meal was delicious, and their conversation was more meaningful than usual. They decided to share a dessert, and by the time they finished, the band had started playing. John noticed Barbara watching the dancers, so he asked if she'd like to dance. Barbara said her dad had taught her how to slow dance. She was a graceful and confident dancer, and John enjoyed their time on the dance floor. They danced 5 more slow songs throughout the night and had a wonderful time. When they returned to the car, Barbara said, "There's one last thing I want to give you for your birthday." She leaned in and gave him a soft kiss on the lips. Although brief, the kiss left John momentarily speechless. Then Barbara stepped out of the car, and John quickly went around to help her back inside. Back at home, they chatted with Mrs. Pierce about their night over coffee. After Mrs. Pierce left, John took Barbara's hands and thanked her for a wonderful evening, telling her it was the best birthday he'd had in years. They went upstairs together, and when John stopped at his bedroom door, Barbara waved and said, "Good night." "Good night, Barbara," John replied as she went into her room. He went to bed and stayed awake for another hour, replaying the night in his mind. On Tuesday, December 31st, at 7 p.m., Fred and June had returned home on the 15th, and the group had spent a lot of time together over Christmas. The four adults were going to a New Year's Eve party at the Sharon Hotel ballroom, with Mrs. Pierce taking care of Amanda. Barbara offered to be the designated driver, so John poured himself a small whiskey while he waited, reflecting on the past 2 weeks as he sipped. Fred and June were amazed at how much Barbara had changed during their trip. Her new hairstyle and confidence made her look different. John had been busy with his growing business, hoping for a slower pace after the new year. He had given his staff reduced hours between Christmas and New Year's to let them enjoy some extra time off. Christmas had been a pleasant celebration with Barbara's parents, and there were many fun moments, like when June and Barbara kept finding John under the mistletoe. Fred and June decided to attend a New Year's Eve party and secured 4 tickets, insisting that John and Barbara join them. At 8 p.m., after Mrs. Pierce arrived to look after Amanda, John and Barbara headed to the party to meet her parents, where they met another couple, Pat and Sylvia, friends of John's. The 3 couples spent the evening dancing, chatting, and having fun. Barbara especially enjoyed being part of the adult group, dancing with John, her father, or Pat throughout the night. She made sure John was with her on the dance floor, and as the countdown began, she whispered, "This has been the best year of my life." John replied, "This year started out miserably for me, but it's ending so much better. I've loved having you in my home. Amanda adores you like a mother." Barbara replied warmly, "That's very sweet, John. I couldn't love her more if she were my own." They continued dancing until the countdown ended. As the new year was celebrated with cheers, John gave Barbara a quick kiss and said, "Happy New Year, Barbara." "Happy New Year," she replied. Fred and June joined them with New Year's wishes, and soon after, Fred took Barbara for another dance. As they danced, Fred said softly, "Your mom and I have noticed that you seem to care about John. Just remember that he's been through a lot with your sister." Barbara reassured him, "I would never hurt John, Dad. I really like him, but I'll wait until I'm 18 before saying anything. I promise." They left soon afterward, and Barbara drove them home. Later that night, Barbara reflected on her father's advice. She knew he was right, but it didn't make waiting any easier. On Saturday, March 15th, a warm and sunny day, Barbara went shopping while Mrs. Pierce visited John and Amanda. Mrs. Pierce offered to take Amanda for a walk, and John helped get Amanda ready, knowing Mrs. Pierce would likely end up carrying her after a short distance. As they headed out, he saw Lynn Cameron had stopped by and was taking photos. Lynn said, "I can't stay, I have a house to show nearby. I saw Amanda and thought I'd take some pictures for Ami. I'll call you later this week." Her last photo was of Amanda and Mrs. Pierce holding hands on the sidewalk, with John watching from the door as Lynn drove off. They all waved goodbye. On Saturday, March 17th, John was getting ready for a date with Lynn at a bar they had discovered a few months ago. They liked it for its good dance music and lively atmosphere. Barbara also had a date, and Mrs. Pierce was scheduled to care for Amanda. John had noticed that Barbara's dates had increased since the new year. Although she seemed to be meeting different guys each weekend, he was relieved that she wasn't dating anyone seriously, as he had felt a bit jealous when she first started going out. After their New Year's Eve party and dinner at the Sharon with her parents, he began seeing Barbara as a young woman. He even wondered if she might have a crush on him, though she was too young for him. Her attention had boosted his confidence. As he left for his date, John met Barbara's date at the door, a nervous-looking teenage boy. John asked him not to keep Barbara out too late. John picked up Lynn, and they enjoyed a pleasant evening dancing and talking before returning to Lynn's apartment for coffee. While waiting for the coffee, Lynn revealed that she had met someone new, Mark Arnold, and wanted to pursue a serious relationship with him. John agreed that their connection was more physical than emotional, and they both decided it was time to move on. On Sunday, May 18th, John was having coffee when Barbara, fresh from a workout, joined him at the table. She asked about his date, and he shared that Lynn had met someone else, so they wouldn't be seeing each other anymore. Barbara seemed relieved that Lynn hadn't hurt John as Ami had. After finishing her juice, Barbara went upstairs, clearly pleased, while John stayed at the table, watching her leave. On Saturday, June 21st, Barbara graduated from high school, with her parents, John and Amanda, attending the ceremony. Barbara was delighted to receive an unexpected award for being the third highest student in her class, attributing her success to John, who had helped her excel in math. She made sure to get photos with him and Amanda as they walked to the graduation ceremony. As they posed for photos, John began to see Barbara as more than a high school girl. She was now a young woman, and he wondered if she would continue living in his home while attending college. Reflecting on his life, John realized how much had changed since his divorce from Ami and hoped that Barbara would continue to be part of his future and not just a memory. On Monday, August 17th, Barbara celebrated her birthday while traveling in Minnesota with her parents, leaving John and Amanda behind. Before leaving, Barbara was worried about Amanda's care, but John arranged for Mrs. Pierce to take care of her. After just 2 days, both John and Amanda missed Barbara, with Amanda being especially fussy and insisting that only Barbara could look after her. Although it took some time, they eventually adjusted with Mrs. Pierce's help, allowing John to focus on his growing business, which had recently secured a major contract, keeping his staff busy and increasing his own workload. John had given Barbara a laptop before she left for college, along with a bouquet of roses, which she appreciated. On Thursday, John invited Lynn over for coffee, and she took a few photos of Amanda before they chatted on the patio. Lynn told John that things were going well in her relationship with Mark, although her insecurity about John's past with Ami remained a concern. They agreed that John would send monthly photos of Amanda until Mark felt more comfortable. Lynn also shared that she was hearing less from Ami, who hinted that Peter had cheated on her, though she didn't give details. Lynn felt that Ami's influence on her life was fading, as she was now focusing on Amanda and her business. On October 8th, Barbara returned home from college and found John waiting to catch up over coffee. She excitedly showed him a Parisian newspaper with a painting by Ami featuring a portrait of Amanda with Mrs. Pierce, along with a shadowy figure in the background that appeared to be a woman in black, seen from behind. Barbara was puzzled by the painting, but John believed the woman in black represented Ami and speculated that the painting conveyed sadness. They concluded that Ami had likely used a photo and replaced Barbara with Mrs. Pierce as the nanny. John printed copies of the painting and planned to give one to Mrs. Pierce. On Saturday, November 15th, Barbara asked John not to make plans for the night of her birthday, as she had arranged to take him out. She made reservations for dinner at the Sharon, where they had celebrated his last birthday, and John looked forward to the evening. At 5 p.m., Mrs. Pierce arrived to look after Amanda, and John got ready in his new suit, pleased with how fit he looked after losing almost 20 pounds. As he came down the stairs, he was surprised at how beautiful Barbara looked in her green satin dress and complimented her on her new hairstyle. On their way to dinner, Barbara took John's hand, and they walked to the car, feeling comfortable together. During the drive, they talked about her college classes. At the Sharon, they enjoyed a relaxed meal in a private booth. John noticed that Barbara seemed more confident and composed than ever. He also observed other men admiring her and asked if she had noticed. She laughed and replied, "Women always do." After dinner, they danced closely to slow songs, with Barbara moving closer to him in a way that felt new to both of them. John tried to contain his feelings, but they continued enjoying the music until midnight. They decided to walk home, holding hands, and during the walk, Barbara unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned against him as they had seen her parents do. When they arrived home, Barbara gave John a passionate kiss, unlike the brief ones from the past. He thanked her for the wonderful evening, but she hinted that the night wasn't over. She led him upstairs to her room, making it clear that she wanted to take their relationship further. John hesitated, concerned about the age difference and how her parents might react, but Barbara reassured him that she was old enough to make her own decisions. They expressed their feelings for each other and shared a tender moment together. In the morning, they showered together and prepared breakfast before Amanda joined them. On Saturday, April 24th, John enjoyed a spring afternoon watching hockey, having spent the morning catching up on accounting at the office. His days were usually filled with managing payroll and bookkeeping for his 7 employees. It was hard to believe nearly 2 years had passed since his divorce from Ami and how much had changed in that time. While he watched the game, the doorbell rang. Expecting a salesperson, he was surprised to see Lynn. She explained that she was engaged and had been on a cruise, which was why she hadn't responded to his calls. But her visit wasn't about her engagement, it was about Ami. After some light conversation, Lynn explained that leaving John had been the biggest mistake of Ami's life. Ami had discovered that Peter, the man she left John for, had lied to her. He had been married twice before, and his behavior reflected his past, deeply hurting Ami. John introduced Amanda to Ami, who was now crying, and they shared a brief hug. Just then, Barbara entered the room, surprising Ami to see her younger sister there, now grown up and without braces. Barbara explained that she had lived with John and Amanda as Amanda's nanny while their parents traveled. The situation took another surprising turn when John revealed that Barbara had legally adopted Amanda and that he and Barbara had married during a trip to Las Vegas. A stunned Ami left the house, visibly upset, followed by Lynn, who went to console her. After helping Ami to the car, Lynn returned to the house, concerned about Ami's state. John reassured Lynn that they would help Ami recover. As Ami drove away, visibly affected, John and Barbara stayed with Amanda, who was asking why her first mom had been crying.